Hi, everybody. My name's Andy Schultz. I work for the Maine Forest Service. My title is Landowner Outreach Forester, and I try to help landowners answer questions about their woods and help them get the assistance they need. I work for the Maine Forest Service, which is part of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I'm part of a team that includes district foresters that are local to different parts of the state, including where you are. What we all try to do is help landowners, people who own woods, which might be people in your family or your neighbors. We help them by answering their questions best we can, giving them information they can use, and introducing them to professionals that they can work with. We do this by phone and by email, and when it's okay to do it, we like to meet folks in person out in the woods, to walk in their woods or to gather classes or groups of people to walk in a forest area and look at the trees up close and personal. A lot of times people ask, what kind of tree is that? What kind of tree do I have on my land? Or I have a lot of trees, but what are the types? So here's a really good book that can help with that. It's a book that the Maine Forest Service produces called The Forest Trees of Maine. Hopefully at some point you or your teachers will be able to have those books for you to look at. Basic tree identification, you start with deciding if a tree is a deciduous tree, which means one that loses all its leaves in the fall, or an evergreen, which, as the name indicates, stays green all year round. Deciduous trees are also called sometimes hardwoods or broadleaf trees. Evergreens are also known as softwoods or needle-bearing or coniferous because they have cones. For instance, pines are an evergreen softwood conifer, and maples are a deciduous hardwood with broad leaves. By the way, these are some pictures out of the book that I mentioned earlier. One reason that we call softwoods is that the wood is softer. It's a lot easier to cut with a saw or to mold into different shapes. Hardwoods, of course, are harder. They're denser, really good for firewood. So you might know pines not only by the tree, but by the boards that are used for furniture. And you might know maple by the sticks of firewood that you have in your wood stove. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about tree identification, there's a great video that we have. It's about 19 minutes. You can click here or look at it later. And now I'm going to pass it on to Alyssa Gregory. She is our district forester, the Maine Forest Service district forester for the Mid-Coast area. So take it away, Alyssa.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Gregory, and I'm one of the district foresters for Maine Forest Service. I cover the Mid-Coast area, which includes Knox, Lincoln, Waldo, and Kennebec. I have a variety of roles serving as a forester, but one of my favorites is meeting with private landowners and providing recommendations for their forest. One topic that comes up pretty frequently during these visits is what species are present on the property. So today we're going to take a look at a few of the common species found in the Mid-Coast. While we make our way through the slideshow, I want you to think of a tree in your yard, at a nearby park, or forest, and see if you can identify that tree from memory. Let's start our identification with our state tree, the white pine. Not only is eastern white pine our state tree, but the white pine cone and tassel is also our state flower. If we were to ID white pine in the woods, we would look for a coniferous tree with long cones that are about 4 to 8 inches and needles in bundles of 5. Our other pine trees here in Maine have between 2 and 3 needles per bundle. Maine has several coniferous tree species, including spruce trees. Let's take a closer look at 2 of the species found in our region, red and white spruce. Red, on the left side of your screen, has shiny yellow-green needles and a stiff cone. White spruce has duller needles that are more of a blue-green color and flexible cones. White spruce also has an ammonia-type smell, where red spruce does not. Cones on all spruce trees point down towards the bottom of the tree, and needles feel spiky when you run your hands over them. The last coniferous species we're going to take a look at today is balsam fir. The needles of a fir are dark green, shiny, and grow in what looks like a hairline part. When you run your hands over a fir twig with needles, it will be soft and not spiky like our spruce trees. You can remember friendly fir and spiky spruce. The cones of a fir tree are purple before maturity, and unlike the spruce cones, the fir cones will point upwards towards the top of a tree. The bark of a fir also looks different than our other coniferous trees, with its resin-filled blisters that you can see in the bottom image. We've seen a few examples of conifers found in Maine, so let's take a look at some of our more common deciduous species here in the mid-coast, starting with birch trees. Maine has several birch trees, but I've placed images of the three I see most in the woods: paper, gray, and yellow. They look similar at first, but paper birch has white bark that peels in larger sheets. It has round catkins in clusters of usually 3, and the leaf is egg-shaped. All of our birch trees will be alternate in their branching arrangement. Gray birch bark looks very similar to paper birch, but the bark will peel in smaller pieces. It will have a single catkin, but sometimes 2, and the leaf will be very narrow with a pointed tip. Gray birch bark looks similar to paper birch, but will peel in much smaller pieces. The gray birch will have a single catkin, but can sometimes have 2 catkins. The leaf of a gray birch will have a very narrow pointed tip. Yellow birch has a leaf shape similar to paper birch, but the bark will be yellow or silvery in color. The twigs of a yellow birch will also have a wintergreen odor, whereas our gray birch and paper birch will not. Our next set of trees are popple or aspen. 2 types of aspen trees I regularly see in the forest are quaking aspen and big-tooth aspen. Both of our aspen trees will be alternate in branching arrangement. You can see from the image that the trees have some differences we can use to identify them. Quaking aspen has shiny, pointy buds, and big-tooth has dull, egg-shaped buds. The quaking aspen leaf will be smaller than the big-tooth, with very fine serration along the edge of the leaf. Big-tooth aspen will have larger, coarse teeth along its edges. We are fortunate in Maine to have several species of maple trees. Let's take a closer look at 3 of them today: red, sugar, and striped. All of our maples will be opposite in their branching arrangement. As you can see on the twigs, the buds are right next to each other, right across from each other on the twig. That is what we call opposite arrangement. Our red maple is on the far left of the screen, and when you look at the leaf, the sinuses will be in a V shape. The buds of our red maple will be dark red. Sugar maple in the center has a leaf with a U sinus. You can remember U as in the U of sugar maple. The buds of our sugar maple will be brown and pointed. Striped maple on the far right has a leaf that is much larger usually than our sugar and red maple. Striped maple leaves will be in the shape of a duck foot. The buds of our striped maple will be a very bright red. Northern red oak is our more common oak species in the mid-coast. Its leaves are dark green and pointed with bristle-tipped lobes. The buds on a red oak will be brown and pointed. Look for acorns near our oak trees that provide food for many of our native wildlife species. The deciduous trees we've looked at so far have just one simple leaf. Let's take a look at deciduous trees with compound leaves, the ash. I have images of 3 kinds of ash trees, white, black, and green. White ash can have 5 to 9 leaflets that turn purple in the fall. Black ash has the most leaflets with 7 to 11. They will turn yellow in autumn. A good way to determine black ash is to look at the bark. Black ash will have corky bark that's squishy to the touch. Green ash has 7 to 9 leaflets that will also turn yellow in the fall, but its bark will be more similar to the white ash and is not squishy to the touch. All of our ash trees will be opposite in branching arrangement. I hope you were able to determine what tree was in your yard based on this presentation. If you were not able to figure out what tree you have or which tree you were thinking of, take a look at the Forest Trees of Maine book that Andy described in his presentation, or view the video from Maine Forest Service found in Andy's portion of the presentation. If you have any questions about tree identification, would like assistance with any forestry recommendations or general questions, I'm going to leave my contact information as well as the contact information for all of our other presenters at the end of the slideshow.
Hey everyone, my name is Tom Schmelk. I'm one of the forest entomologists with the Maine Forest Service. So entomology is the study of insects. So forest entomologists deal with a lot of the insects that threaten the health of our forests. So frequently we monitor and manage the various species of insects that are affecting our forests. We also work with a forest pathologist who deals with a lot of tree diseases. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So one of the pests that affects our forests as well as our human health is called brown-tailed moth. So brown-tailed moth is originally native to Europe and was accidentally brought over here in 1897 into Massachusetts. So the caterpillars are covered with irritating hairs that cause rashes, which is one of the major problems with brown-tail. You can see the caterpillars have these 2 orange dots towards the back end. And the reason why they're called brown-tailed moth is because the adults have this brown abdomen. So brown-tailed moth caterpillars are not picky eaters. They eat many trees, but some of their favorites include oak and fruit trees, birch, elm, poplar, and many more. So the biggest problem with brown-tailed moth is that they have those hairs that I mentioned before. So the hairs are barbed and hollow, filled with a toxin that causes an irritation to people, as you can see from this gentleman that has this rash down here. So people vary in their reaction, sort of like poison ivy. Some people get it really, really bad, and others don't get it or react at all. So doing yard work is one of the most common ways that people come into contact with these hairs, since the caterpillars shed them and also wander around in the leaf litter. So caterpillars spend the winter in these palm-sized webs that are way up at the tops of the trees, at the tips of the branches. So back around the turn of the century in the early 1900s, kids used to be paid a bounty for clipping out these webs from the trees in their town. I believe they were paid 5 cents for every 100 that they collected. So this picture on the bottom is sort of the product of their efforts. Like I mentioned before, brown-tailed moth has been in Maine for well over 100 years, 117 to be exact, so not a new problem by any. So one of the things you can do in your own yard this winter is to go out on a nice bright sunny day with the sun to your back and look up at the tops of the trees, especially the oak trees, or if you have any cherry or elm in your yard, and you'll be able to see the webs. The white silk that composes most of the web shines a whitish color in the sunlight, and you'll be able to see the webs at the very tips of the branches. If you're able to reach any of the low-hanging webs, you can clip them out and either soak them in a pot of soapy water or have one of your parents burn the webs. In every one of those palm-sized webs, there's between 25 and 400 caterpillars, so clipping out each one counts. So one of the other insect pests that affects our trees here in Maine is hemlock woolly adelgid. Hemlock woolly adelgid is originally from Asia. They only attack hemlock trees. So the insects are very, very small and they're covered in a woolly whitish wax, and they live on the undersides of the twigs at the base of the needles, where they basically suck the tree sap out. So that whitish woolly wax basically helps the hemlock woolly adelgid avoid predators, but also keeps them from drying out. This photo here is of a female hemlock woolly adelgid, and each female can lay around 300 eggs, so quite a lot of babies from each very small insect. So when the population of hemlock woolly adelgid is very high, they can basically kill the tree over a period of 3 to 4 years, basically by sucking the sap and sucking the life out of the tree. One of the other insects that affects tree health in Maine is emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is originally from Asia, and it's a shiny green metallic beetle that's roughly the size of a penny. So the larvae of emerald ash borer feed on the living layer of the tree underneath the bark. That layer is called the cambium, and by feeding on that cambium layer, they basically kill the tree because they're eating up that living layer. That living layer helps transport nutrients, and when that's cut off, the tree sort of suffers in health and dies over a period of years. So one thing to look out for is that woodpeckers love to eat those emerald ash borer larvae under the bark, and they'll sort of key into where they are under the bark and sort of strip off the bark and get down to them and eat the larvae. So when the woodpeckers are looking for these larvae underneath the bark, they will sort of tear off the bark, leaving sort of a blondish color underneath. That's called blonding, and it's one of the ways that we're able to detect new emerald ash borer infestations. So the pathologist that we work with, his name is Aaron Bergdahl, and he deals with a lot of tree diseases. So trees, just like us, can get viruses, bacterial infections, and fungal infections. So sick trees vary in their symptoms. When they have one of these diseases, they can either the leaves colors will change, branches will die back, or they'll drop their leaves at the wrong time of the year just due to stress. So one of these diseases that we are on the lookout for in Maine is called oak wilt. So oak wilt isn't in Maine yet. The closest infestation is over in New York State, so not very far away, but it's a fungus that kills oak trees. There are many, many species of oaks, but unfortunately none of them we found have a resistance to this fungus. So when oak wilt starts to kill a tree, the tree will die pretty rapidly over a couple of weeks, typically in the middle of the summer, and the tree will basically drop most of its leaves within a short period of time, again, typically in the middle of the summer. And that's sort of a big warning sign. If you're raking oak leaves off your lawn in the middle of summer, that's a bad sign, and probably a sign that you might have oak wilt in your tree. So typically when a tree has oak wilt, some of the signs and symptoms are the leaves will sort of turn brown from the outside in. So you can see on this leaf here, the middle of the leaf is still green, but the edges are sort of turning brown. And this will happen over a short period of time. If you have multiple oak trees in an area that are all sort of dying very suddenly in the middle of the summer, that's a good indication that you might have oak wilt. And if you do see any of these symptoms on your trees, contact the Maine Forest Service right away, and we can send somebody out to take a look at it. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for tuning in. And if you guys have any other questions or concerns, feel free to contact the Maine Forest Service, and we'll get right back to you.
Hi there, my name is Jan Santerre. I am the Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator with the Maine Forest Service within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. In Maine, we call our state urban and community forestry program Project Canopy. It's in this role that I am presenting to all of you the National Association of Conservation Districts poster contest theme for 2021, which is Healthy Forests and Healthy Communities. In my role as the state urban and community forester, I work to make sure that people all across Maine understand the value of community trees and forests so that they want to plant and maintain those forests for future generations. In my job, I work with cities and towns, schools, libraries, conservation groups like land trusts or conservation commissions to help them in developing and maintaining long-term community forestry programs. Essentially, what that boils down to is I work with both town and organization staff to plant trees in the places where they can make those big differences, like along our streets and in our parks, as well as to work with them to manage our community forest resources, places like our town forests and school forests. I also do training with these folks to teach them how to plant and maintain those trees so that they live the longest life they possibly can and provide the greatest benefits, as well as to teach them how to identify trees so they can conduct things like street tree inventories or forest inventories, to develop plans so that we can best budget and maintain those trees and forests for future generations. But why do trees matter? For a lot of folks, trees just are something in the middle of the lawn that they have to mow around, or something planted in the sidewalk that they have to plow around. But trees, in fact, provide our communities with a whole range of benefits, from cleaning the air that we breathe, to providing wildlife habitat, to increasing our property values. One of the most basic benefits that trees can provide is shade. Where is the best place to be besides the beach on a hot summer day? It's in a park under the shade of a tree. Large shade trees can cool the air underneath them and around them by as much as 2 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. One medium-sized tree can actually provide the benefit of 10 room-sized air conditioners operating nearly a full day. That's a huge energy savings. Something I believe most people do recognize is that trees provide us with clean air. They clean the air that we breathe as part of their biology. They also clean the water that we swim in, that we drink. Maine is really fortunate to have extremely clean water. And why is that? It's because we have a great forest resource. Maine is nearly 80% forested in our rural lands, but we also maintain forests within our communities and the places that we live. And it's all of those forests working together that provide us with the clean air and clean water that we're so fortunate to have here. A less recognized benefit of trees is their ability to reduce flooding. We've had a lot of severe storms in Maine over the last few years. And because of the tremendous forest resources that we have, the impacts of those storms has been lessened, because trees' roots have this innate ability to absorb water. In fact, one tree can lift up to 100 gallons of water. And those tree roots also hold the soil together. They prevent something called erosion, where soil moves around. In an average-sized small city here in Maine, a well-forested landscape can provide a great resource to those communities by reducing erosion, preventing soil from moving into rivers and oceans. Another benefit that most people probably don't think about is the fact that trees and green landscapes improve our health, our own public health people. Treed environment can reduce stress, reduce blood pressure, actually helps people who suffer from things like asthma or heart disease, diabetes, and in fact can help hospital patients to actually reduce their healing time. Trees have been shown to have a calming and healing effect on adults and teens. And I can attest as an adult that when I'm outside, I'm a much calmer and happier person. This one's pretty straightforward for anybody who pays any light bills or heating bills, but trees around our homes and around our businesses actually provide us with energy savings as well. Well-placed trees around homes and buildings can reduce our cooling costs by up to 30%, which is a lot when those costs are going up constantly. And this is one that most people really don't think about. In fact, a lot of people think that things like trees and shrubs can help increase crime, but in fact, it's been shown that tree canopy is correlated with a reduction in crime, because well-landscaped areas help encourage people to get out, get to know their neighbors, get to know their neighborhood. Trees help to reduce crime by creating something called community cohesion. And it's been shown that in places where we have green landscapes and well cared for tree canopy, that it can boost the local economy. Main streets with trees and flowers encourage people to linger longer, shop for longer, and in fact are actually willing to pay more for the goods and services in those places where they shop. Another natural resource that we in Maine take great pride in is our wildlife diversity. And in part, that's due to the trees and forests that we have in our communities, surrounding our communities, and in our rural lands. Trees and forests provide for a tremendous diversity of wildlife, everything from large mammals down to the smallest insects. In fact, native trees particularly are very good at supporting our native wildlife species. Some of our oaks can support up to 537 different types of caterpillars, whereas some of our non-native trees, which we use in our landscapes, don't provide nearly that diversity of support. A single pair of chickadees needs to bring home more than 9,000 caterpillars to rear a clutch of nestlings. So all those caterpillars in those oaks are pretty important. Maybe not the brown-tailed moth so much, but the other ones. So given that you have a better understanding of the value that trees and forests provide in our communities, I expect you're all going to go forward and draw some really excellent posters. In addition, you might be thinking about planting a tree of your own. So why would you want to plant a tree? That's something you want to think about when you're considering planting a tree. Why? Are you looking for flowers? Are you looking for wildlife habitat improvement? Are you looking for shade? That's going to determine where you want to plant that tree. And when you look at where you want to plant, you want to look if it's in the sun or the shade, if it's in a wet spot. And then you also want to consider some other characteristics of those trees, like what size and shape is it eventually going to be? Will it conflict with things like power lines or with sidewalks or roads? When you're planting a tree, you want to plant the right tree for the right place so that it can provide value for many decades to come and live the longest possible life that it can. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing all of your wonderful posters.